everybody, how's it going? Today I'm making a video that I've been wanting to make for the better part of 2 years now. Nope, probably 2.5 even. Because this is a very, very, very unique and interesting and probably quite rare engine. So, without further ado, this is my circa 1925 Toro Model ME. You can see the data tag here. Serial number 2730. And yes, Toro did make their own engines. So, I guess, well, start with a little bit of company history. This is going off memory from a while ago, so I might be a little bit wrong here, but this was the first model engine that Toro ever manufactured. They made these as a direct replacement for the Briggs & Stratton Model PB. And this particular one was on a Planet Junior walk-behind tractor. It would have replaced the Briggs PB at the time. And then they also used them on their own equipment, I believe, because I know that they made some, like, you know, yard rollers and some of their own mowers and whatnot. But they are just super, super wacky and interesting engines. But yes, this was the first model that they ever made. I believe they were from the late teens, early 20s through the mid-30s, I want to say. And then I know in the 30s and 40s they came out with a couple different models like the MF and whatnot. They look similar, but they're mechanically pretty different, as I understand. But yes, it's a very, very interesting engine. Backstory on this specific one was this was at Bob Dowd's estate sale. He was a local engine collector here on the island and part of the Long Island Antique Power Association. And when he passed away, I don't know, probably almost 3 years ago at this point, his grandson sold off basically all the engines that he had in his barn there. And there was just stuff everywhere. Most everything was in pieces, and just this entire barn was just chock full with stuff. It was insane. I'll see if I can throw a picture or two in here. But I bought probably 10 to 15 engines at that place. I think probably the most notable one that you guys will know about is the Whitty. It's my 3-horse Whitty Model B. And this happened to be one of them because I was rooting around back under one of the shelves in a dark corner. I found this thing tucked over in the corner there. I didn't even know what it was. I messaged one of my engine buddies, Chris, and I was like, what is this? And he said, it's a Toro engine. I said, okay, I've never heard of that. It's coming home with me. Especially for 20 bucks, I couldn't go wrong. But yeah, the whole thing was so dirty that you couldn't even see that it had paint on it. The whole thing was covered in that like greasy, dirty, oily sludge stuff. That's what happens when you get really old gas and oil and then it gets covered in dirt. Like if any of you guys have worked on like an older Briggs where the oil seal leaks and then like the inside front shroud is covered in that kind of stuff. It was crazy. The entire, like literally the entire engine minus the gas tank. So as I started cleaning it, I was like, holy crap, wow, there's original silver paint on it still. But yeah, so I bought this thing for 20 bucks minus the carburetor, and dragged it home with me. And because it was so interesting, I decided to tear it apart, and I realized that this thing needed literally everything. Unbeknownst to me at the time, the actual Planet Junior walk-behind tractor that this would have gone on was out back in a different building behind the barn, and it actually had one of these engines on it, but that engine was missing so many pieces and was so rough that I didn't even realize it was the same engine. And when I did realize that and I went back to try and buy the tractor too to put this on, it was gone and somebody else bought it. So it must be yard art somewhere on the island, unfortunately. Hopefully it didn't go to the scrap yard. But yeah, I'm assuming that Bob at one point picked up the tractor and then he probably found this engine to put on it someday and just never got around to it. But yeah, this thing had been sitting for probably, if I had to guess, at least 25 years, if not 30 or 40. And he hadn't done anything with it. It was as found, because as I tore it apart I realized that this thing needed literally everything. I'll throw some pictures in here while I'm talking, but I started by, I forget exactly what order it was, but I took the whole thing apart. My buddy Chris and I, who, if you're watching, Chris, thank you so much for all the help with this. I could not have gotten this engine running without all of your help and advice. But I took this over to his place. We measured out the bore, found out it was kind of worn. It was very not round. So he took his Sun and rigid body hone and honed it out to round, just about as big as we were comfortable with going. Then he went and cut the valve seats and ground the valves for me, so I lapped them in when I got it home. Had to send the magneto off to Mark's Magneto in Connecticut to get it rebuilt because the entire thing was trashed on the inside. I know that he had to put all sorts of new parts in it. I don't remember exactly what he did. Sourced a carburetor. It's actually not correct. This is for a Coldwell mower, but I got it really, really cheap, and it's the right style. It's one of these Tillotson tube mount carburetors, and it actually runs really well off that. You just have to turn the gas down quite a bit. Obviously all the gaskets fell apart, so I had to do that. Clean the entire thing out. And then the other notable job that I had to do to this was, well, also got rings from Auto Gas Engine Works. They were actually new old stock rings for probably the teens or the 20s for a different engine. And they just happened to be the same bore size, so I took them and filed them down a bit, and they actually ended up working out pretty well. It was actually pretty interesting. They're overlapping rings, so the gap kind of comes down, flatten over that almost like a Z-bend. But probably the biggest job that we had to do to this, at least effort-wise, was I took it apart and I pulled the crank out, which, interestingly enough, is a two-piece crank. There's the shaft that comes in and over like this and down, and then this other shaft with the little gear on it's pressed in. It's also got bolt-on counterweights, which was pretty neat to see. Most small engines of this era didn't even have counterweight cranks at all. But I found that this thing had been sitting in one spot for quite a while. There was no breather in here, which I still need to come up with something. The paper towel is temporary. And obviously a lot of moisture had gotten in there because the crank surface was just destroyed. So I ended up bringing it up to school with me, and then my buddy Jake brought it over to J&M Machine Company, and they ground it. So then I had to mess with the shims and fit the bearing because it's a Babbitt insert bearing on the rod, and that was just a whole bunch of work. Not to mention to separate the two pieces, because it bolts on so that the nut and the second part of the crank were in the way of grinding it. That was an absurd amount of engineering and force required to get that apart. I'll see if I can put in some pictures there of me at my school's machine shop working with one of my professors. It was absurd. We came up with this whole bracket thing to press on the crank without trying to break anything. And we had it in a big press. The press probably had a 4-foot bar on it, and I hung my body weight off the end of that thing, and it didn't budge. Ended up having my professor hang off of it, and then I took a mallet to it and shocked it, and then it finally cracked loose. It was insane how much force that took. But yeah, fast forward 2.5 years worth of work, and many hundreds of dollars later, I have a very nice running TORO ME engine. And like I said, it's just a super neat engine. I've did a lot of research on these, and the most that I can find on them online is a couple smokestack posts. So as far as I'm aware, this is going to be the first video of one running on the internet, at least that I can find. I've done many hours of research, so if there is another one, I'd love to know about it. But yeah, between just the story behind it and just the way that it's engineered, and even just the way it looks, it is just a wacky and really interesting piece. I guess some of the unique features, we've got an oil sump, and there's a pump in there, so it's like, it's not pressurized, but there's the sump, and then it pumps up, and there's another plate here, and then the rod takes it and slings it off that plate, which is kind of interesting. We've got exposed valves on the side here, and the little lifters there, so you'll see them running up and down later. Just the exhaust goes out the front through the shroud, which is kind of neat. We got the Tillotson tube mount carburetor, this American Bosch mag off the side. It's actually a 6-to-1 gear reduction off the camshaft, which is kind of interesting. So the crank is here, your gear for your mag is there, and then you start it with a hand crank off the cam, and that's why there's a compression release, because then you're turning it over 6 times faster than you're cranking it, and it's got a decent amount of compression. But in order to keep the ratio right between the piston and the valves, there's actually 3 lobes for each valve on the camshaft, so you still got a 2-to-1 relationship there, but it can be a 6-to-1 reduction, which is kind of neat. And then, like I said, the 2-part crank with the bolt-on counterweights is also just really wacky. Not to mention the whole jug comes off and everything. It's a weird engine. And like I said, I took a ridiculous amount of work to get it to this point, but hey, it's here and it's running good, and it's going to go to its first engine show probably ever this summer for the Long Island Antique Power Association show, so we'll see how it does there. But I've run it for many hours at this point, letting it break in, and it just seems to putt right along. But yeah, super wacky engine. It's funny, I actually found an original manual for this. It says change oil every, I think, 2 days or something like that. Which is pretty ridiculous by today's standards, but it was pretty cool to see how they did it back then. I think I showed this earlier, but I can't remember. It's the data tag on it. But yeah, like I said a couple times now, super wacky engine. It's pretty neat to see. Also, there's a couple, this thing must have had some sort of accident, because there's a farmer's fix here that's supposed to look like this, supposed to be one solid piece, and it cracked at one point, which you can actually see there. So they put this piece of plate on there and drilled a hole through, and then put these 2 screws here. How they managed to break that in the first place is beyond me, but they did. And it must have been done a while ago for a type of repair like that to be done, because I'm pretty sure Bob just bought this thing and shoved it in his barn and never touched it. That's kind of what he did, best I could tell, and based on what I've heard. So that was probably done long before him. But anyways, without further ado, I think I'll go ahead and fire this thing up for you guys, show you how it runs, and do a little walk around. So let me put the camera on something and we'll get to firing it up. Alrighty, let's go ahead and give this thing a start here. Got the fuel open from before. Let's give it some choke. Open the compression release, because otherwise we'll never get it going. We get this crank in a better position. Even with this compression release, this thing is really hard to crank over. It's pretty crazy. But here we go. Without further ado, go ahead and close the compression release. We'll open the choke and give it a little bit of throttle because it's a little cold-blooded. It'll smooth out and pick up a little bit of speed as it warms up. Like I said, it's a little bit cold-blooded, so when you first start it, it runs a little bit rough and a little bit slow, but yeah, it's actually an insanely quiet engine. Most of the noise from this is all the gear noise and like the valves ticking up and down. The exhaust itself, even running it without the muffler, is probably one of the quietest engines I've ever listened to. It's also like one of the loudest engines I've ever listened to, just based on the amount of like gear noise and things whirring around that it's got. But I guess it was probably the mid-20s, so I guess that's kind of normal for back then. It's all straight cut gears in there too, so that's not helping anything. Still need to figure out a breather. Paper towel thing is temporary. I think I might steal one off a Briggs engine, like a Model B or something, one of those little round ones. See if I can fit that in there. Because the paper towel doesn't look so great, but we haven't gotten that far yet. But yeah, no, it runs pretty damn good. Pretty happy with it. Pretty neat to watch running too, with the valves going up and down in there. You can see the little lifters going up and down too. I can see now why this thing got so covered in that like oily, dirty, greasy stuff, because oil just kind of seeps out of everywhere. You can see it back on those lifters there. They're all shiny with oil that's gotten wicked up. I'm sure the front seal leaks a bit. This back seal surprisingly doesn't leak that much, especially considering it's not much of a seal. But got ball bearings on both sides of the crank. I forgot to mention that. And the way that all this is lubricated is the ball bearings open on both sides. There's no seal, so oil just kind of gets pushed through there and it gets slung around by the gears in here. That's literally how they did it. Probably turn this throttle up a touch. Obviously the nut on the front of the flywheel there isn't original, nor is it going to stay. Just one that I had lying around. When I got it, they had a pulley jammed up there, and they used a set screw of the pulley to hold everything together, which was both kind of risky, and also it cut off all the airflow going to the engine, so I don't know how it cooled itself like that. But that flywheel's on there so tight that even if the nut wasn't there, it'd probably stay in place. I think the pulley is probably why this is all bent out of shape. This is an oddly shaped cooling shroud too. Honestly, not entirely sure if all of them look like this, because like I said, this is a Planet Junior engine, so they may have done things a little differently. You can actually see the remains of the Planet Junior logo on the sides of the tank here. Yeah, this one's better. Oh, died there. Let's see if we can't get it going again. Turns out it just ran out of gas. Not sure if this is original or not. It kind of looks like it was homemade. Just looks like a pipe nipple and a cap that they drilled a hole in. I have no idea. But yeah, like I was saying, I'm not entirely sure if this is how all the Toros were. This tank was definitely originally red, and you can see the Planet Junior logo there. I'm sure some of them had different tank setups and whatnot, but I think the rest of the engine is pretty much how they all were. But yeah, definitely a pretty neat one. Makes me really happy to see that this thing's running as good as it is now. Go ahead and slow this down a tiny bit. See if we can get it to stop 8 cycling. That's a little better. Yeah, because that's the wrong carburetor, that fuel adjustment is really, really sensitive. It really doesn't take much for it to be too lean or too rich. Doesn't rev a heck of a lot, I can say that much. Even when you do rev it to full like that, it takes its time getting up to speed. Starts jumping around a lot when it's not bolted down to a giant heavy walk-behind tractor, despite the fact that it's balanced, which I thought was kind of interesting. I thought it would be a little less jumpy than it is, but then again, we're on asphalt with 2x4 skids there, so that's not helping anything. But yeah, just a super neat engine. I'm really, really happy I got it going, because you don't see these very often at all. Probably one of the more rare engines in my collection, at least of small air-cooleds. Between this and the upright Ideal V, that's some pretty wacky early mower engines. And then the cool part is, I'm not there yet. I picked up a Briggs Model PB basket case at Cool Spring last year, and while I'm still working on it, I've got everything I need. I just need to do some, I need to get the crank ground and do some machine work on the rod just to make it all round and good. But I've got basically everything else, so hopefully next year when I'm up at school I can do that. And then I'll be able to have this and the PB running side by side. So you'll see this engine, which is what it was, and what it was supposed to replace, which will be pretty neat. Because even the PB is a pretty wacky engine too. It's just much more well known than these. But yeah, stay tuned. I'm doing a video on that slowly but surely. Started it last year. I just didn't have time at school this year to actually work on it. A little busy working on this one and a couple other projects. But yeah, I love how you can see the valves going up and down. It's so cool. They're actually surprisingly loud too. That's a lot of what that like ticking noise is the lifters going up and down. The cam lobes on this thing are tiny. They're just these little points, probably that big. So it's a very sharp up and down, I think, which is what makes it tick so loud. And Mark did an amazing job rebuilding this magneto. It wasn't cheap and it took a long time, but I got this thing back and it throws lightning bolts. It literally throws a spark about that far. In fact, I was going to the hardware store. I forget what I needed, but oh, I needed the nut to hold the gear on to the end of it. It's a tapered shaft with a little keyway and a nut, and I lost the nut. And I was just playing around with it. I had it in my hand, and I turned it over maybe that fast, and it shocked the crap out of me. So he definitely knows what he's doing. If you need magnetos rebuilt. Yeah, it's definitely a happy engine now. A long, long ways from the way I got it, that's for damn sure. Would be pretty neat to find the tractor for it one day. I don't know how many of them are around either, but maybe I can convince the guy that bought it to let me buy it off of him or something. I don't know. We'll have to see. But either way, it's cool just to see it running. Maybe I'll see if I can get a pulley or something to fit on this shaft, and I can run like a water pump or some other little display with this thing. But I think for this year, it's just going to sit here and putt along like this. One other kind of funny thing is these weren't really designed to be shut off and restarted, I guess, because this compression release after a couple minutes of running gets really too hot to touch, which I think is kind of funny because if you run out of gas and you have to restart it, you're going to have to grab that with pliers or something. No way you're grabbing onto that by hand. But yeah, like I said, it's just a super, super happy, good running engine now, and I am beyond happy and excited to have seen it or gotten it running again. Super, super satisfying because it was a ridiculous amount of work. There are very few engines that I have that have taken as long to get running and get right as this one, because like I said, this is going on 2.5 years now. So when you put that much time into something and it starts out as rough as this one, to see it actually running again like this is pretty cool. Especially when it's something really unique like this thing. But yeah, anyways, guess we'll go ahead and shut her on down here. Just a little button on the back of the mag. Even this mag is wacky, honestly. The way that it's built is kind of wacky and interesting. The magnets go around the outside. I think there's some coils and stuff in there, and then the central thing spins, and then if you pop that cover off the back, the points are in there, but the points spin with everything. I don't really know how it works, but it's pretty interesting. Well, anyways, guys, that's all for this video, I think. So thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, hit the little like and subscribe buttons. I'd appreciate that. By all means, leave a comment if you have one, and I'll see you in the next one. There's plenty of projects to come.